the heights, I'm surrounded in mountains of sin. Even in the valley, shine a light in my darkness. Even in the valley, shine your light. Even in the valley, shine your light in my darkness. Even in the valley, shine your light.
Well, it's great to see everybody. Welcome to CBC. Please turn in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 39. That's where we're going to be. We're continuing a series today looking at the life of Joseph. And we started this series last week. If you weren't here, make sure to go online, check out Pastor Billy's sermon on that. We talked about Joseph and his big dysfunctional family. It made us all feel better about our situations. And some of us maybe, but some of you are going, Joseph, what's that? I could show you like way worse. But either way, we got some encouragement from looking at Joseph's story and his approach that he took in his life. The fact that what we saw last week is Joseph was thrown into slavery. He was thrown into a pit, taken out, sold into slavery by his brothers, betrayed. And where we pick up today, he's actually overcome a lot. We're going to get into that in just a second. Before we do, I just want to remind everybody, or maybe let you know for the first time, we're doing something today called Start Here. We do this about once a month, where if this is your first time here, or maybe the first time in a long time, or maybe you've been coming for a while, but you want to get connected, right after the service, through these middle doors and to the right, we call it guest reception. I'll be there. I just want to take about 8 to 10 minutes of your time to let you know about our church, about how you can get connected, to let you know how we can hopefully serve you and your family as you're here. So if you're new, right after the service, 8 to 10 minutes through those doors. Today we're going to do something that unfortunately we don't always do. We're going to do something that's a little bit different because most of the time, and this is an unfortunate thing, most of the time when we come to church, we feel like we have to put on this kind of facade of perfection. We have to come and we have to appear as though we have our whole lives put together because we're at church and we're around other church people, and we're afraid that if we're real and vulnerable and actually honest about the things that we're going through, then someone might judge us. Well, here's the thing that we need to understand. Someone's going to judge us, all right? So like that's going to happen. But here's the thing. Before you can actually get free from something, you have to get honest about that thing. And so today we're actually going to talk about the area of sexual temptation. And I want to get as real as I can get. And I want to invite you to get real and honest with yourself and with God about what you're facing right now. Some of us come into this room with all kinds of things in our minds, things that we're facing, that if we really were honest about it with ourselves and with God and with the people around us, we're in a dangerous spot. Some of you might be dealing with an addiction or a temptation to pornography, and it just kind of keeps creeping into your life. That was the thing for me. When I was 10 years old, I stumbled onto some pornography for the first time. There was a neighborhood kids who had a bag with magazines in it, and we all looked at them, and I can still remember the effect that it had on me. I could still remember that I liked it. I could still remember that I wanted to see more of it, and that was when I was 10. And that started me on a many-year journey of trying to break free from this, because when I was a teenager, the internet became a big thing and popular and, more ubiquitous, and everybody had it, and so then it became just easier to access it. And so this was something that plagued me for a long time, and I've been free of it for several years. And there's lots of people that come in, young men who will come in and want to talk to me about this particular kind of sin, this particular kind of hang-up. And as I'm talking to them, there's two things that are always going through my mind. Two things. The first thing is, I'm sitting there thinking, I am so glad to be free. Like, I'm so glad. It is such a pit of darkness that I'm so glad that God's given me a level of freedom that I never thought I would experience. The second thought that I have is, I am so terrified at the prospect of falling back into this sin, because I know how destructive and dark and nasty and evil it is. And I usually tell them that. I usually say, hey, this is what's going through my mind. I'm really glad I'm free, terrified of ever falling back into it, because I want them to see that there's hope. I also want them to understand the severity of the situation. When it comes to temptation, And it doesn't have to be pornography. Maybe for you it's something different. Maybe there's a person in your life that's you're not married to. You are married to someone, but the person that you like, person that you find yourself attracted to, the person that you kind of want to be around more and more isn't your husband, isn't your wife, and you're flirting with a line there, and maybe you haven't crossed it physically, but emotionally, you're there. Maybe this could be the day where you decide, you know what, I'm taking some steps back. Maybe some of you, it's that you're dating, you're not married, you're trying to follow Christ, but maybe you've been single for a long time and you're just saying, you know what, it seems like everyone else is having sex, everyone else is doing what they want to do anyway, why not me? And so you're at the line and maybe you've crossed it, you're trying to back up from it. Whatever the case is for you, here's my hope and prayer for this morning. As we look at Joseph and we discover what he went through, we're going to see a man who was unwavering in his commitment to do what was right. And as we read his story, I want us to ask ourselves, what would we do? Would we cave? Would we stand? How would we deal with what Joseph dealt with? And we're going to see as we walk through it, kind of a blueprint for how to deal with this kind of temptation. So Genesis chapter 39, starting in verse 1. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had brought him from the Ishmaelites, who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him, and he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in house and field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food he ate. A few things I want to point out. The first thing is, Joseph's come a long way. Last week, where we left off, he was being shipped off to Egypt, being sold as a common slave. And now, all of a sudden, here he is. He's in Potiphar's house. The Lord was with him. This is a refrain that you're going to see all throughout Joseph's story. The Lord was with him. The Lord was with him. Because the Lord was with him and had his hand on him, Potiphar saw this, and he elevated him to a higher position. And as he elevated Joseph, the Lord continued to bless Joseph. As the Lord blessed Joseph, the Lord blessed Potiphar's household. And it was a win-win. And Potiphar afforded to him a level of trust. Potiphar afforded to him a level of authority that was far above any other servant in the house. Joseph was someone who was in charge of the finances. He was someone who would have ran the estate. He was someone who would have been the one that made the house work. He had just as much authority as anyone in the house, with the exception of Potiphar and perhaps Potiphar's wife. So with that, with this success, we see that something is going to happen that's going to really challenge Joseph's status. It's going to really challenge his faithfulness to God and Potiphar. So we pick up in the second half of verse 6. It says, "Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance." So the writer stops just to say, by the way, not only is Joseph really successful, but Joseph is a good-looking guy. If you want to have an idea, we don't have any pictures of Joseph, but if you want to know an idea of what Joseph may have looked like, he probably looked a lot like me. Verse 7. I'm kidding. Okay, verse 7. Seeing if you're listening. "And after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, 'Lie with me.' But he refused and said to his master's wife, 'Behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house. And he has put everything in my charge. Everything that he has put in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept anything back from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?' And as she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not listen to her, to lie beside her or to be with her." So here you have Potiphar's wife, who pursues Joseph. And she's very aggressive. It says day after day. So this wasn't just a one-time occurrence. It wasn't a, hey, lie with me. And Joseph says, no, I don't really want to. And she says, okay, just thought I'd ask. It was a day after day persistent I want to be with you, demanding him to be with her, demanding him to have sex with her. This is what Potiphar's wife wanted, and Joseph refused day after day. A couple things he does. He weighs the cost. Joseph says, look, Potiphar has afforded to me this level of trust and authority that I can't betray. Why would I betray that? Not to mention the fact that by doing that, I would actually also be sinning against God. And he didn't want to do that either. I think a lot of times when we find ourselves in these situations, it's helpful to visualize the destruction that's going to happen. Visualize or weigh the cost and say, is this really worth it? And Joseph says, no, it's not. Why would I do that? He was no ordinary man at this point. This is important to understand. He was successful. He had gotten a promotion. I think he was targeted. Potiphar's wife may have been attracted to power. Joseph was probably someone that if you could get anyone in the house to fall, let's go after Joseph. He had vulnerable success. And people that have a lot of success, that have positions of power, are particularly vulnerable to this kind of thing, whether you're a man or a woman. So Joseph resists the temptation. He acknowledges the great trust he's been afforded, that it would be a sin against God and a sin against Potiphar, and he refuses. He would not budge. Let's go to verse 11. But one day, he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house was there in the house. She, this is Potiphar's wife, caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. So now she's crossed the physical barrier. She's not just telling him to lie with her, she's actually grabbing his clothes and demanding that he lie with her. But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. Anytime the scriptures teach about temptation, especially sexual temptation, it doesn't say stay and reason with it. It doesn't say stand there and see if you can come to a rational conclusion. It says flee every single time. And this is what Joseph does. He flees. As soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled out of the house, she called to the men of the household and said to them, see, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. So now she's falsely accusing him. And as soon as he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled and got out of the house. Then she laid up his garment by her until her master came home. And she told him the same story, saying, the Hebrew servant whom you brought to us came in to laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house. So Joseph does the right thing. He makes the right decision. He runs, and yet he's still being falsely accused. He did the right thing, but he's being wrongly accused about it. So not only is Potiphar's wife going to tell her husband, right, and turn her husband against this guy, but she also manages to tell all the other men in the house. These were most likely servants. They were most likely Egyptian servants. So she points out this Hebrew, okay? So she's playing to a sense of anti-Semitism that probably existed at a pretty high level in this time, and maybe even in this household. But they had this Hebrew who was in charge of them, and all of a sudden she's like, hey, this Hebrew came in, and he's trying to laugh at us. The word laugh at us could also be translated, and sometimes it is translated, to make sport of us, to make fools of us, to ridicule us. So she's saying, he wasn't just making a pass on me. Really what he was doing is he was making a fool out of this whole household. And so she manages to turn the whole house against Joseph. Then she turns her husband against Joseph. So Joseph's back in a position once again where he is completely alienated and ostracized from the people around him. Verse 19. As soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, this is the way your servant treated me. His anger was kindled, and Joseph's master took him and put him in the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in prison. So we'll pick up there next week with what happens to Joseph in prison. But I want to point out a couple of things that we can discover from Joseph here. The first thing is that Joseph was unwavering in his commitment to the Lord. I think this is important. You're going to see this throughout the whole life of Joseph, that at this point, Joseph could have easily justified doing the wrong thing. Joseph could have easily said, you know what, at this point, God has just abandoned me, and I've got to get what's mine. I was sold into slavery, and I've managed to work my way to the top of this household, and now this opportunity has presented itself, and I'm owed this. And yet he didn't. He was unwavering in his commitment to the Lord. He says, how can I sin against God in this way? The second thing we see from Joseph is that Joseph did what was right in the face of temptation. Joseph did what was right in the face of temptation. This was a natural temptation. They were alone. Nobody was in the house. It was repeated. So there was plenty of time for him to justify this in his mind, or for him to kind of go, well, wouldn't be so bad. There's plenty of time for him to do all the things that we do when we give in to temptation, and yet he didn't. He was unwavering. He did what was right in the face of temptation. It's easy to justify doing the wrong thing when the right thing hasn't happened to us. It's easy for us as people, this is the human condition, to say, well, my wife is kind of neglecting me and uninterested, or my husband seems to be doing other things and he's uninterested, and I kind of deserve this and I'm owed this, and it's easy for us to do that. Or maybe we say, you know what, it's hard, I'm in college, everybody around me seems to just be having all the fun that they want to have, and why not me? Or we've been dating for a long time and we're not married, but we're gonna get married, so why not? It's easy to justify the wrong thing when we feel like the right thing hasn't happened to us. Joseph could have said, you know what? I tried trusting in God and it got me thrown in a pit. I tried being faithful and I got sold into slavery. And now look at me. I'm successful. I can take advantage of this opportunity, but he doesn't. He doesn't. Sometimes you can do the right thing and still be wrongly accused. So Joseph now is in the pit of a prison. And this was all a chain of events that led him to where God sovereignly wanted him, and we'll pick up with that next week and see what happens. But I want to pause in the story for today, and I want to ask this question for our purposes. What can we learn from Joseph's experience? What can we learn? I think there are two things. The first thing is to trust God's good plan for your life. To trust God's good plan. Joseph had this kind of holistic view of where God wanted to take him, and he said, okay, if God has me in a pit, God has me in a pit. God has me on a caravan down to Egypt as a slave, he's got me as a slave. If God has me in a household as the head of the household, he's got me there. Now he's got him in prison. And all along the way, Joseph kept this principle in mind that's going to be repeated throughout this series. This is Paul. This is for us to keep in mind as we look at this. Paul says, and we know. Everybody say no. We know. He doesn't say we think. He doesn't say we hope. He doesn't say we guess. He doesn't say we would like to believe. He says we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. And Joseph kept this in mind, and we would do well to do the same. The second thing that we see that we can learn from Joseph's experience is to decide now to war against temptation. To decide now to war against temptation. There's some people who may believe as followers of Christ, and you may be a follower of Christ, you may have been a follower of Christ for a long time, and I know not all of us are, and if you're not, I would love to invite you to become one. But it's fine if you're not. If you're exploring faith, that's all good. But a lot of us have probably been Christians for a long time, and there's this idea that's erroneous, and I just want to mention this. Sometimes I think what we want to tell ourselves is that one day I'll be free from temptation. Whatever the temptation is, and it's like, one day I'll be free from that. Well, the problem with that is, to be tempted is to be human. The writer of Hebrews actually says that Jesus was tempted in every way as we are, yet without sin. So temptation is just a part of the human experience. And so we need to decide to war against temptation. Following Christ doesn't mean the absence of temptation. It means declaring war on the temptation that's already there. In fact, Paul says this in 1 Corinthians, and they dealt with all kinds of dysfunction. They weren't following Christ. They were claiming to be Christians, but really blending in with the world around them. You couldn't even distinguish them from other people who didn't claim to follow Christ. And here's what Paul says to them. Therefore, let anyone who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. Anyone who thinks they're doing great, anyone who thinks that they don't have to worry, anyone who thinks that this temptation is somehow removed from them, or they're above it, or they're at the spiritual plane where they don't have to worry about these kinds of things, take heed. Be aware. You will fall, if that's your way of thinking about it. I know for me, the pornography sin and the propensity towards lust and the things that I've dealt with, it was helpful for me to understand how temptation works. Because there's actually kind of a progression, and when I show it to you, I think what you're going to do is say, oh yeah, that's what happens. So here's a progression of temptation. The first thing is thought, and then imagination, and then justification, and then choice, and then sin. All right, we're going to start out with something a little bit lighthearted. Okay, thought. I would love some ice cream. Okay, that's the thought. Imagination. Oh, I could really go for a McFlurry with Reese's peanut butter cups mixed in. I can taste it. The soft serve vanilla ice cream that they serve up at McDonald's that's just an amazing array of chemicals and water frozen to perfection. And then that sweet, sweet taste of Reese's peanut butter cups with the chocolate outside and the peanut butter filling. I mean, I can taste it right now. And in fact, as I'm talking about it, I'm kind of craving one. Okay, so thought, imagination, justification. You know what? I've worked hard this week. I've watched what I've eaten. I've worked out every day. And besides that, I mean, let's just be honest. There's like 8 million McDonald's around the world. I'm not the only one eating McFlurries, right? I mean, you probably had a McFlurry sometime in the last 5 years, right? Choice. You know what? I'm going to go to McDonald's and I'm going to buy a McFlurry. I'm going to do it. I've made up my mind. Sin. 5th McFlurry this week, okay? No, I'm kidding. All right. I'm just getting real here, okay? All right, let's do something a little bit more that may hit a little closer to home for some of us. Thought. I would like to see something sexy, appealing. Imagination. I know exactly what I'd like to see. I know exactly how to find it, and I can dream about it. I can just visualize it. Justification. Everyone else is into this kind of thing. What wouldn't be so popular if they weren't? My wife neglects me. My husband neglects me. Why not? This is okay. Besides, I'm tired. I put in a long week this week. I'm exhausted, and this will help relax me. So what's so wrong with it? Choice. You know what? I think what I'll do is I'll click around and I'll just see if I stumble into something. Because then if I stumble into it, well, you know, I wasn't looking for it, right? And then sin. I've made up my mind. I'm going for it. And really, if you think about it, where the sin originated was actually here. Jesus says when you think in your mind that you want to have sex with that woman, you've actually already committed adultery with her in your heart. So all this is just a progression to get you from the thought to the action. But the sin begins here. This is why Paul says in 2 Corinthians to take captive every thought, to make it obedient to Christ. This is why Paul says in Romans 12:2 that we need to be transformed or changed or renewed by the renewing of our minds, because so many things start in the mind. Let's look at another one. Thought. I hope I get put on the same project with that girl, that woman, or that man who I work with, that I kind of like, but hey, I'm married and that's cool, but I like the way that I feel when I'm around this person. So I hope we get put on the same project. Imagination. Maybe we'll meet up after work. Maybe we'll have to go out to dinner. Maybe we'll have to go out for drinks just to kind of talk about the project because, hey, a lot of hours put in and this is important. There's deadlines that we got to meet. So maybe this will be a situation that we'll have to find ourselves in. Justification, nothing wrong with meeting up. It's innocent enough. After all, it's part of my job. It's what I do. I have to do it. I mean, there's nothing that I can do to get out of this. And there's no way that I can hold myself accountable. This is just what people do. Choice. Let me put myself where he is. Let me put myself where she is. And maybe we can try to make something happen. Maybe if I stumble into this, then it'll be okay. Sin. Now I've done something that I can't take back. I've made the choice to sin. And if you think about every temptation that you face, probably follows some kind of progression like this. And maybe for you it's not pornography, and maybe it's not someone at work, maybe it's a different kind of sexual temptation, and there's all kinds of temptations. I want to point this out. There's all kinds of temptations. There's all kinds of addictions, substance abuse, codependency, relational addictions. But today, we're focusing on sexual. Why? For one thing, Joseph had a very real sexual addiction facing him. But the second reason is the allure and pull of sexual temptation is so easy to confuse with the natural order of things. It's so easy to justify this because God actually put this in you to feel this way. that men would be drawn to and attracted to the beauty of women, and that women would be drawn to and attracted to men. Here's the thing. This is why we're all here, right? Because somewhere along the way, and I don't want to gross anybody out, but somewhere along the way, somebody thought someone else was attractive and appealing, and there you are now, right? And then you did that with someone else, and now you have kids, and this is how the human race goes along. But here's the thing. In the confines of a marriage between a man and a woman, this is a beautiful thing. This is actually how God designed it. He designed that this gift of sex would be something that would be enjoyed in marriages and provide pleasure and fulfillment and satisfaction. And yet, it is so twisted and so perverted that it can get in our minds, and we're so used to seeing sexual temptation and sexual expression being twisted in all kinds of different ways that it's so strong, and it has such a pull on us. And so today we're just kind of spending some time in this. And so I would just want you to think right now, what is your temptation? What is the thing that when you're just left to your own imagination, to your own thoughts, what are the things that you deal with? And you don't have to tell me. This is between you and God, just to think about what is it that when you are at your worst, or what are the situations that you're in day to day that you just say, that's where it happens. That's when it happens. That's how it happens. Because this progression is actually something that's described in James. He says, but each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. That means you can't blame it on someone else. That means you can't say, she made me do it. He made me do it. God made me. The devil made me. No, this is your own desire that you have cooked up in your mind, that I have cooked up in my mind. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when fully grown, gives birth to death. So this progression of the desire, then the conception of it, then it grows, and then the result is death. So where's the hope? Because if you're like me, it's easy to listen to something like this and just play through all of the failures in your mind. Just to play through, well, yeah, I mess up here and I mess up there and I don't know about this. And it's easy to lose sight of the fact that there actually is hope, that there's freedom to be had. And I want to show you just a couple of things that will hopefully encourage you. 1 Corinthians 10:13, Paul says, no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. I love this. What this means is that you're not facing something unique. It may feel unique. You may feel alone. You're not. You're not alone. Of the 7 billion people who live on the planet, someone else has dealt with the exact same thing, and probably in the exact same way that you're dealing with it. So whatever that attraction may be, whatever that temptation may be, it's common to man. It's something that someone else at some point in human history has dealt with. And here's the beauty. God is faithful. God is faithful. What does that mean? That means that God actually, He loves you. He's got a good plan for your life. He wants you to be free. He wants you to have a level of freedom from sexual temptation and sexual sin and sexual addiction that you may not even think is possible. He is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what your ability. But with the temptation, He will also provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it. For Joseph, the way of escape was to run. He left his garment and he ran. For you, it may be different. But the point is, it's there. And I've often seen the way of escape and ignored it. Or I've seen the way of escape and I've walked through it. And I know what both options feel like. Let me end with this. The writer of Hebrews says, we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. So if I could encourage you with anything, it's that your freedom, my freedom from any kind of temptation, any kind of sin does not come from our ability to try harder. It doesn't come from our ability to just white knuckle it and be strong. It actually comes from the power of Jesus, that He died in our place for our sins. He rose to conquer death. He rose to have the resurrection power of God in us. And when we follow Christ, we have that same thing. And so may we be the people of God who refuse to accept that this is just who we are. We just have these struggles, and instead we say, no, God has a better way. God has a better plan, and I'm going to follow that and put one foot in front of the other and trust him to keep me going in the right direction. Let's pray together.